Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be making a couple of long knit fabric dresses. This pattern also has a knee length option as well as different sleeve options, and it also has pockets.
I absolutely love stripes, and especially this knit viscose fabric that drapes beautifully on the body. I'm going to be sewing the dresses from start to finish, and I'm going to be showing how to match stripes, how to gather, how to finish the neckline with binding, and how to sew the pockets. First of all, I've cut all the details. I was careful to align both front and back at the side seams so that they start at the same stripe. This way they will match later when sewing. Although matching the stripes is not mandatory, it will really step up your sewing game. This is something you don't need to be concerned with if you are using some solid color fabric or something with a floral pattern, for example. I'm going to start with the shoulder seams. For all joining seams, I'm going to use a serger. If you don't own a serger, make the seams with any type of stretch stitch according to your machine manual. Once the shoulder seams are done, I'm going to attach the sleeves. I've marked the notches for the front and the shoulder seam on the sleeve. I'm going to match the notch with the shoulder seam and start pinning the sleeve to the bodice, face sides together. Then I align at the side and match both front notches. The sleeve on this pattern is shaped differently at the front and the back, so I mind which sleeve I'm pinning to the left and which one I'm going to sew to the right. I align the sides and the back and distribute the rest of the sleeve along the armhole curve. Then I'm gonna repeat with the other sleeve and make the seams. Next, I'm going to make the underarm seam. I'm careful to align each stripe because the way I align and pin now is the way they are going to look when sewn. I also align at the sleeve seam and at the hemline, matching the stripes all along. This is how my dress looks at this stage. The straps match. I'm satisfied how the bodice turned out, and I move on to the skirt. The skirt is also significantly wider than the bodice, so I'm going to make a gathering before I join the bodice and the skirt pieces. But first of all, I'm going to sew the pockets. I have 4 pocket pieces, each 2 facing each other. I'm placing one pocket piece face sides together with the skirt and 2 inches or 5 centimeters below the waist, and I'm doing the left and the right side on the front skirt piece. On the pattern there are notches that mark the position of the pocket. I'm moving on to the other side, and I'm going to repeat with the back skirt piece. Then make the vertical seams to attach the pocket pieces to the skirt. Next, top stitch over the seam you just made. This seam will play the role of an understitched seam, which will not let the pockets to come out and show. By the way, I didn't bother to match the stripes here, and now editing the video it really irritates me. It doesn't make a significant difference because you can't actually see the pockets on the finished garment, but if you like me strive for perfection, make sure to align the stripes here as well. The next step is to match the side seams of the skirt. To do that, start at the top, sew all around the pockets and finish at the hemline. I usually sew more than one dress when I test my pattern. Some of them I sell, some I give as a gift, so I made a couple of variations here. For the dress shown in this video, I've cut the skirt against the grain to achieve a lengthening effect with the stripes. You don't need to do that, just cut the skirt on grain as specified on the pattern. If you like how this one turned out though, and you are using striped fabric, cut the skirt against the grain as I did. At this point, the skirt looks like this. We need to attach it to the bodice. The skirt is much wider than the bodice, so I'm going to gather it. I adjust the stitch length so that I sew with a basting stitch. I lock my stitch at the beginning and go all around the skirt. When I reach the end, I don't lock the seam. I want to use the thread tails to pull and gather the skirt. I'm pulling the fabric back gently as I don't want to break the thread as I go. I'm going to continue until the waist circumference of the skirt matches the bodice. I also try to distribute the gathering evenly between front and back so that the skirt and the bodice match at the side seams. Once I'm done, I'm making a knot at the end of the threads so that the gathering gets fixed in place. I'm aligning the bodice and the skirt at the side seams, face sides together, and I start pinning. Then I'm making the waist seam. This is what we have at this point. The gathering turned out nice and even, so I'm moving on to the neckline and hems. What you can also do here is to add a narrow 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch wide elastic on the inside over the waist seam. If you are working with a heavier weight fabric or if your gathering didn't turn out just right. I'm leaving mine as it is. On the dresses you see modeled here, there is no elastic added to the waist. To finish the neckline, I'm going to use some binding tape. To begin, I'm going to make a vertical seam so that the binding becomes one piece. I'm going to mark a notch at the center front and center back for even distribution. Then I'm folding it in half, wrong sides together. I'm going to start pinning the binding to the neckline face sides together. I like to match the seam on the binding with the center back. The binding should be shorter than the neckline. That's why I'm being careful to distribute it evenly all along the neckline so that it doesn't create uneven gathering. I find the center of the binding and pin it to the center front notch. Then, holding at the pins, I pull the binding so that it stretches and matches the neckline. And then put another pin at the shoulder seam. You might also add some more pins along the neckline so that you have everything fixed in place. I'm pulling the binding as I go, but not too much, just enough to match the neckline. If you are serging, be careful not to cut out too much of the binding or cut uneven seam allowance. I would suggest fixing it with a straight stitch first and then serging so that you don't make a mistake and end up with uneven binding. I'm done with the binding and I move on to the hems. I'm using the cover stitch machine to hem, but you can use a double needle or any stretch seam on your machine. Go with whatever you have. Once I finish the skirt, I also hem the sleeves. I drafted the pattern in sizes from 18 months to 14 years and I'll link to it in the description. By the way, if you would rather make your own pattern, I have a tutorial on how to draft a bodice and sleeve for knits on my website. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, like it, subscribe to my channel and also ring the bell to get updates when I post a new one. If you use any of my tutorials to fix or make something on your own, tag me on Instagram at Sewing for a Living so I can see it and love it. Thank you so much for watching.